Many, many sermons ago, you can look it up online, only on YouTube, not on Facebook, because they get rid of things after 90 days. So very long ago, we had Good Shepherd Sunday. And on Good Shepherd Sunday, I did the Lies My Pastor Told Me Good Shepherd Sunday, in which I talked about how when God speaks of the Good Shepherd, or when Jesus speaks of the Good Shepherd, he's speaking about himself, or God, right? He's not speaking about your pastor. So one of the reasons that if you say, like, hey, shepherd, I'll be like, nope, at best, I'm a sheepdog. Okay? And I remember in that whole sermon, I talked about how throughout the Bible, especially in the New Testament, whenever you see the word shepherd, it's not about the religious leaders. It's not about the pastors or even council or even the church. It's Jesus explaining who Jesus is and how Jesus works. And I said in that sermon, I get how with those readings about the Good Shepherd, you're like, what does it matter? How does it change things? And I said in that sermon, a lot of weeks later, I'll explain how it changed things and how misunderstanding who the Good Shepherd is has actually hurt the church, and I mean multiple denominations, over a lot of years. So let's talk about how it has been misinterpreted, okay? For 1900 plus years of Christian history, the general way was to interpret, as I indicated, that whenever the Bible talks about the Good Shepherd, they're talking about God, okay? Not me. But then sometime in around the 1970s, 1980s, you start to see this theology pop up where pastors start to refer to themselves as the shepherd, right? I'm the shepherd, you're the sheep sort of mentality, which I totally don't think is biblical because, again, whenever we talk about shepherds, we're talking about God. Whenever we're talking about sheep, we're talking about all of us, myself included, okay? And then all of a sudden it switched to being like, well, no, you're the sheep and I'm the shepherd. And it became sort of the vernacular a lot of us grew up with, starting in the 1970s and 1980s, 1990s, and continuing really to today with this idea. And I think it's been a really bad misstep. Because it has led to this whole idea that if one person goes, that is what our focus should be on. The one that is lost, not the 99 that are here. And yet, Jesus gives us a completely different answer, which we'll get to over here. Now, people will say, like, what is it? How did we get here? Why would we go from 1900 years of interpreting it one way to all of a sudden sort of down this weird little rabbit hole and, in my opinion, hopefully get back to the older interpretation? Well, the only way I can describe it, because I wasn't alive in the 1970s, and I wasn't really all that alive. I mean, I was little in the 1980s. I know some of you are now laughing because I just made you feel old. Okay? Is to use pop culture. Okay? So the pop culture I'd like to reference is, who here has seen a James Bond film? Any James Bond fans? All right. So if you know your James Bond films, and I have watched nearly all of them except for the most modern ones because I'm still struggling to get over Pierce Brosnan not being James Bond since he was the greatest of the James Bond. I know I say controversial things sometimes. If you think about it, you start off with Sean Connery, right? Then, of course, you have Roger Moore, then the person we will not speak of with his one film. And then Roger Moore came back, because God loves us. Okay? And then you had Timothy Dalton. Okay? 1980s James Bond. Okay? The old James Bond, the Roger Moore, Sean Connery James Bond, was a stoic James Bond, right? I mean, Sean Connery basically does not have feelings in all the movies. Neither does Roger Moore, right? They are these stoic, manly men, as was understood in the 1950s. But by the 1980s, we realized, like, ooh, stoicism, really unhealthy way to live your life through mental health, right? We know mental health-wise, stoicism, not great. But then we go down, sort of as a whole culture, down this weird little track, which leads us to Timothy Dalton. His James Bond was this sort of like fake emotional James Bond. Like, you knew where he was going and what he was going to do, but he'd pretend like, oh, no, not me. Right? Anyone who's seen the Timothy Dalton, you know what I'm talking about. See, there was this weird time where we wanted to get away from the stoic guy in the office with the perfect suit to, like, the feely guy, but we ended up at creeper, not feely guy. And that is what was written for poor old Timothy Dalton, who's a perfectly good actor. It's that same energy, for lack of a better way, or vibe, I'll use a more modern sense, a vibe, that got us from this older interpretation that Jesus is the Good Shepherd to that your pastor is. Now, you're probably wondering, what harm is it? Like, you haven't proven the harm you said you're going to prove like 9 or 10 months ago. But here's how it plays out. So in the 1970s and 80s, what you start to see is as you move from the idea that Jesus is in charge to the idea that the pastor is in charge, and that not that it's Jesus who goes after the one sheep, but the pastor or the leadership or the congregation, you start to have one of the most ridiculous ideas in modern Christian history pop up. And that was the idea that you could only lead from consensus. In other words, if one person objected to an idea, we can't do it. Folks, if there are 4 Lutherans in the room and I ask a really good question, I will get 10 different responses. You cannot lead from consensus. You don't lead anywhere from consensus, and you know this. Imagine if we all had to consent to the same mayor. We'd never be done. If we all had to consent to the same idea at your office, no ideas would ever get off the ground, or at your school, right? The reality is when we start to say the Good Shepherd is the pastor or the leader or even the greater church, not Jesus, we start trying to do things we don't have the capacity to do. One of the greatest wastes of any pastor's time, and almost every pastor of every denomination I have ever talked to has run into this. They go to a church, one of the first things, particularly in churches that are dying, will say to the pastor when they show up is, will you please call every inactive member and see if you can get them back? Folks, that is a horrible idea, because what you're doing is not attending to everyone who's there. You're not attending to everyone who's out in the world who might be in need. You're chasing lost sheep, not making sure the other 99 don't get attacked by wolves, not making sure that those who are lost and are looking for you are welcomed and brought in. Sometimes this falls on leadership, sometimes bishops, sometimes whatever, depends on the denomination. Why? Because it denies the humanity of the church, the humanity of church leadership, the humanity of pastors, and therefore the absolute fallibility of all of us, the absolute limitations we all have. Which led to a lot of churches trying to run by consensus or spending all their time running here, there, and everywhere, trying to be like, okay, if you're going to leave, we'll bend over backwards to keep old Aunt Mary from leaving. And often making a place less worshipful, less dynamic, less good for what most of the people were looking for. Not just the people inside, but the people outside. It dragged down the ability of the church to move. It's one reason that one of the inside jokes of all church people is that there is time, corporate time, school time, government time, and church time when it comes to getting things done, right? Church time, by the way, is the slowest. But it's because we got dragged into this. So what is the actual interpretation? What is the good news of this text that we sort of went down this weird cul-de-sac of theology about? It's simple. God is the good shepherd, okay? Therefore, if a sheep gets lost, of course we do what we can with the resources we have to address and help that person. But at the end of the day, we all have that scenario where we have that friend or sibling or parent that we've had the conversation every way we can about why it would be great if they'd come back, and they're not, right? And we have to at some point say, God is out there searching for them. God is out there with them and wherever their spiritual journey is currently taking them. And God will eventually pick them up, throw them over his shoulders, and bring them back. But we are called not necessarily to just care for that one. We're called to take care of the 99. Because when the shepherd is away, who's left but the sheepdogs and the sheep themselves? See, the good news is once you've tried what you can, don't walk with the guilt. Don't walk with the hurt. If you have no idea how to get your sibling back, that's not your fault. That's not your burden. That's God's burden. God's job, not ours. See, and that's a freeing message for so many people. Because I know very few families where everyone all just like gets along and goes to church and we're all good and everyone's spiritually fine. Most families, there's brokenness, there's hurt, there's pain. And those who are righteous and love God and are doing what they need to do to take care of themselves and others sometimes sit there going, I don't know what to do. What does God want me to do? And the answer might be, take care of yourself. God's got this. So as you go out this week, take a few minutes in your prayer life. If you do find yourself trapped or ridden with guilt or shame or regret because you don't know how to reach that one person, whoever that person is in your life, ask yourself, have you forgotten who the Good Shepherd is? And can you trust that the Good Shepherd has it in his hands? And maybe this is a worry you don't need. If you are the one who feels lost and adrift in an ever scary and anxious-ridden world, know that it is when you find that community, when you find your fellow sheep, when you find your fellow group of humans who are desperately trying to understand the unfathomable, amazing divine that is God, one clumsy inch at a time. Hold on to that. Because when you find your home, it is truly something special. Amen.